welcome to the lesson on dinner for breakfast. So I'm sure most of you at some point in your life have been told that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. In fact, this is something that I actually grew up with. I was always told to never skip breakfast. Going through uni, going through, my life, I've always had that idea reinforced. When I started swimming training, I would never eat before training. Like, that just was awful. But when I got home from training, I would absolutely have breakfast and then head off to school. Now, I was having breakfast after training because obviously I was starving. I was always hungry as a swimmer. But once I left school and once I stopped swimming, I found that I stopped eating breakfast. It wasn't something that I really enjoyed. And most of my life, most of my adult life, I've been tut-tutted by various people for not eating breakfast. And particularly, as I was teaching in the health and fitness industry, I would get told by people when I said, I don't eat breakfast, it was you should be eating breakfast. It's the most important meal of the day. And I found that interesting because I was healthy, fit and strong. So whatever I was doing was obviously working. And yet I would still have people pushing the idea to me that I was doing harm by not eating breakfast. So the question then is, that we need to answer first, is breakfast the most important meal of the day? Now, what's interesting is once upon a time, what people would have eaten for breakfast would have been just what was left over from the night before. And that's because we didn't have fridges and freezers and shops and convenience food. Everything that would be eaten on the following day would have needed to have been there from the day previous, because you're not going to be able to go out and slaughter an animal first thing in the morning, because that takes time. So in the morning it would have typically been your cured meats. There might have been some eggs if the chickens had laid eggs and if they had chickens, but other than that it would have been just what was left over. Now, the concept of breakfast being the most important meal of the day came from someone called John Harvey Kellogg, and you probably recognize that last name. And this was in the late 19th century. Now, he was a devout Seventh-day Adventist. And if you know anything about the Seventh-day Adventists, they obviously are a religious organization, and they're vegetarian or vegan. And they promote the vegetarian vegan diet as not only being the most healthy for you, but also I think a sign of being more spiritually mature. So if you eat the vegetarian diet, good for your body, good for your spirit. Anyway, so what Kellogg was particularly concerned about back then was masturbation, and he believed this to be the greatest evil, and that bland food would actually help prevent this act. And this is where cornflakes came from. It doesn't get much more bland than cornflakes. If you've ever eaten cornflakes with nothing on them, they're pretty gross. And there was this idea that if you had a light breakfast, you'd work harder, and then that hard work would add this extra moral layer to your character and help you or help prevent you from masturbating. Anyway, so he had this product to sell and this evil to rid the world of. So with this clever concept of breakfast being the most important meal of the day, and that this is how we're going to deal with this moral problem, he sold the concept of breakfast cereals. And not only did he sell a product, he sold an idea. And it's an idea that it has been so pervasive that we still tout this idea of breakfast being the most important meal of the day today. So I would suggest that if nothing else, he was a very good marketer. So let's look at what the research actually suggests. This is a very new study, and it's quite interesting. The researchers wanted to look at whether the consumption of a regular breakfast would have an effect on weight change and energy intake. Now, this is in people in high income countries. Now, what they actually concluded is that the addition of breakfast might not be a good strategy for weight loss, regardless of established breakfast habit. Caution is needed when recommending breakfast for weight loss in adults, as it could have the opposite effect. Further randomized controlled trials of high quality are needed to examine the role of breakfast eating in the approach to weight management. Now, what's interesting about this study is it was just looking at meal patterning. So people who had breakfast versus people who didn't have breakfast. And what they found in this study was that people who did not eat breakfast actually consumed less energy and that they were losing more weight. Now, this is just one study. They didn't look at what people were eating for breakfast. And obviously, there's going to be a difference between people who are having a high quality breakfast versus those who are just slapping something together out of a cereal box. So if you are having a protein rich, real food, dinner-esque breakfast and it works for you, then of course you would just continue on as per normal. However, if you are having cereals and yogurt and fruit and all these things that the Western world tends to have, that's much more like dessert. And it's not going to keep you full. And you're going to find that in a few hours, you're actually hungry again. And the chances are you'll continue to eat more and more throughout the day. Now, just to add a little bit more confusion to the issue, there is additional research to consider. And there's far more research than this. I'm just trying to show you some interesting data. Now, this is based on the analysis of about 500,000 food diary entries. And the man that did this, his name is Marty Kendall. He is actually an engineer, and his wife, Monica, has got type 1 diabetes. And when they first started looking at low-carb diets, they did so on the premise of trying to control Monica's blood glucose levels. And he's pretty much now become very, very passionate about nutrition and micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, and basically optimizing your diet. I will refer back to Marty again at the end of these slides. But basically what he found was that people who ate breakfast tended to eat less calories throughout the day, which is the opposite to what we're seeing in this other study. Now, be mindful, this is not published research. This is an analysis of food diary entries, so things like in MyFitnessPal, which is obviously going to be flawed in some ways, and it's got its problems and its limitations, but it's still quite interesting to look at. And what they actually found was not only that people who ate breakfast ate less throughout the day, but the more you ate at breakfast, if you look over here, the less you consumed over the course of the day. And this really puts forward this idea of having a really decent breakfast. Now, we're going to talk about the concept of breakfast in just a moment. For the sake of this right now, we'll just talk about breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Now, there were similar findings for those who ate most of their energy or a big lunch. So if you ate a really big lunch, again, the more you ate at lunch, the less energy you consumed over the course of the day. And then not surprisingly, people who were having the biggest dinners were the ones who were consuming the most amount of energy. Now, what this basically suggests is that if we're going to look at meal patterning, the best thing to do is to eat as much of your food in that first meal. And I want you to think about it as meal one, not breakfast, because there's this idea that we have to wake up and eat. You don't wake up and eat. You wake up, you wait for your hunger cue, and then you eat. So right now it's nearly 11 a.m. and I haven't had anything to eat. And I will get hungry probably in the next sort of 30 to 60 minutes. And that's when I will eat. Why on earth would I eat if I'm not actually hungry? We force ourselves to eat sometimes, partly because we think breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but also because we sort of think, oh, well, if I don't eat now, when am I going to eat? But when you're in that overnight fast, your body, you can continue that fast for a prolonged period of time and you get a lot of benefits from it. And if you actually start to build up some ketones actually have a side effect of making us feel less hungry. So they have this satiety effect to them. If you can extend that fast, you're going to get a lot of benefits from it. So all you have to do is when you wake up, just don't eat straight away. Just wait until you start to feel hungry. Now that might be at 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m., whenever it is. But the idea is that when you have that first, okay, I'm actually hungry now, that's when you eat most of your energy. And if you can do that, the likelihood is that you're going to eat a lot less energy over the course of that 24-hour period. And then if you eat the second biggest meal being your lunch, then there's an even better chance of consuming less energy over that 24-hour period. So you might have something to eat at, say, 10 a.m. and you make that a big meal. And then maybe around 2, you have another meal and that's it, you're done. You may not be hungry then, for the rest of the day, or you might have something really little just before bed. But what you will find is just by flipping our meals around, the biggest meal at the start of the day, less at the end of the day, we get some really great benefits without even looking at what you're eating yet. So without even changing your diet in any other way, just changing when you're eating your biggest meal, we see really great benefits. Now, what's interesting is that this data also suggests that early time restricted feeding is the most ideal way to eat, or ETRF. Early time restricted feeding is just another form of fasting. And I think that this is probably the most ideal way to eat because it aligns with our circadian rhythm. We don't tend to follow our circadian rhythms anymore because of our modern lifestyle. We've got lights on all the time. We've got the fluoro lights that are interacting with us all the time. We've got night shift workers. We tend to find that we're too busy at the start of the day, so we're eating on the run, not eating throughout the day, and then smashing food at dinner time and then snacking all the way through till, right to when we're going to bed. And that's not a natural way of eating if we look at human history. So early time restricted feeding tends to align with our circadian rhythm. And again, you're not even changing anything yet outside of eating your first meal or your biggest meal earlier in the day and trying to keep your feeding within 8 hours. So you're trying to eat all your food in an 8-hour window with most of it occurring at the start of the day. And that's it. And then after that, you can start looking at what it is you're eating and you can start fiddling around with your macronutrients. Do I eat more protein? Do I eat less fat? Do I eat more carbohydrate? So if you just start with this first, you're going to see some amazing benefits. Start your day with a really big protein-based meal. Chicken, fish, steak, other seafood, eggs, go for it. And then the next time you eat, make it decent again. And then at the end of the day, just keep it to a snack, something light, and then get to bed. Simple. So putting it together, we've got to remember that breakfast is not the most important meal of the day. Forget that concept. Your first meal is the most important. And this is where you really want to go for gold. So whenever you get that first hunger cue, make it a cracker. And you want to have dinner. You're having dinner for breakfast. And remembering it's just meal 1, meal 2, meal 3. Forget the idea of breakfast, lunch, and dinner because then we've got these ideas of what it should look like. And we've got it backwards. We're having these massive big meals at the end of the day, and that doesn't make sense. Now, eat your first meal when you get hungry. Not because it's a particular time of day, just eat it when you're hungry. Eat most of your energy or calories at the start of the day. Get that protein in. Think breakfast like a king, or meal 1 like a king, meal 2 like a prince, meal 3 like a pauper. Keep your food within that 8-hour window and avoid snacking. You don't need to be snacking, and snacking is likely to be problematic. Every time you snack, there is an opportunity for you to choose the wrong food or to eat too much food. So if you are finding that you're hungry, it's likely you're not eating enough at each of those meals. If you are going to snack, number 1, what is something I can eat that has got a lot of protein in it? All right. And lastly, a massive big thank you to Marty Kendall from Optimizing Nutrition. So you can find Marty Kendall at optimizingnutrition.com. And this is the link to his Breakfast Like a King, Lunch Like a Prince, and Dinner Like a Pauper article. And it's really interesting. I would encourage you to have a read of that. All right, everybody, I will see you all for the next lesson. Bye.